right. So back to what I was saying earlier. Everyone here has probably used Canvas before. Is anybody who hasn't used Canvas? Everybody used it? Good. So this introductory module also has some basic instructions and quick Canvas links and technical help, all those kinds of things in case you need it. But the only two things that you need to do, once again, are update your Canvas profile, and it gives you instructions in there for that. And, of course, add to the class rules. And you can see we already have some. No eating, listen and respect, no use of phones. You can have your phones with you just as long as they're on the desk and they're face down. Or you can keep them in your bag with your Chromebook. That's fine, too. No eating in the classroom. It's on there twice. And the next place that we can go to, the notes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break up the notes so that we do a little bit each day, but not too much at the same time. So you can see the first item there is the Gov1 notes. If you want to go ahead and click on that, please. And if you need a copy of the full notes, you can see that they're already on display within that module there. It includes all the information that I'll go over in class. But this document right here, take notes using this notes document. If you want to go ahead, please click on that. And I'll ask you to make a copy. Just go ahead and click on that. I don't believe I am able to, since I am the actual owner. But when it comes up, it should look something like this. See, there's a little picture of a lecture on there, so you know that you have the right file and that it should be used for the actual lecture notes. All right, so then, of course, you can put your name up at the top and then the dates, so that way you keep it organized. You know which one is which. The units, of course, this is, you can just type Gov1 for the unit. And the topic, you can type Before America. We're going to talk about the reason why the topic is called Before America, because we will be talking about the different types of government that inspired the Founding Fathers. And on the right-hand side, you just want to type major points. You can just press enter, and then you can see the document is short, but the page will just keep expanding as you type. And then on the left-hand side, just for every page, you just need to make sure you have 2 or 3 comments or questions, especially if they're ones that you want me to answer, even after you turn it in. When we are done with this at the end of the week, you will then click on Submit Assignment, and you will upload this document to turn it in. But you will still have access to it in your Google Drive. What we will do is we will this week go over the first unit material. That includes the notes, the supplemental reading, and the actual textbook reading, and there are 2 quizzes that go with that. The second week, we'll do something similar. And then the third week, we'll have a test on the first and the second units. And that's how it will work. We'll do 2 units, and we'll take a test. Because typically, there's 6 units of government and 6 units of economics, but having 12 tests would be ridiculous in one semester. So what we'll do is we'll take a test every 2 units instead. So the first week we'll cover a unit, the second week we'll cover the second unit, the third week we'll do the study guide, do a review, and take the test. So that will be the pattern we'll follow throughout the year. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. So you can see this stuff. I have the due date is for the end of the week. So all this stuff will be this week. The second unit will be due by the end of the second week, and then the third week, which will be the test and the study guide, and that will all be due by the end of that week. So that's the pattern we'll follow. We'll have 3, basically we'll have 6 units, 3 tests for the first semester for government, and the same thing for economics for the 4th quarter. So let me go ahead and put the notes up on the screen. The And so we'll be talking about early attempts at democracy and republic, because these two ideas would really inspire what exactly is involved in the United States. And so the first thing that we should ask ourselves, of course, and a lot of people wonder this, especially when they have to pay taxes, is what does the government do? What is its purpose? Well, the most important purpose, if the one thing that you could take away from this class, is the main purpose of the government is to protect the people's rights. That's the main job of the government overall. So there are a lot of stuff that it does, there are a lot of services that it provides, but the one thing that you might want to actually take down here is that the government's job is to protect our rights. And that's pretty simple, but it's actually kind of complicated, because after that you need to ask, what are our rights, and is the government doing good enough job protecting them in the first place? Now, there's a big difference between that and then what we expect out of the government, because obviously determining, as I said, rights and how well they're protecting them is often difficult and debatable. But obviously the things that people can see and grasp are what they take away from what the government does. And so anything that they can actually see or put into their hands, they view that probably as what the government does. But of course, it's a little bit more complex than that. So for instance, we see a country with a lot of roads and highways like the United States. There you can see the top owners of infrastructure on the left-hand side by country. You can see the United States is the leader by far, because we have some of the most complicated systems of roads and bridges and dams and schools and hospitals and all kinds of stuff. China is quickly catching up with that, of course, but that's also because they have over 1 billion people. And then, of course, they provide us with security. And that's one of the things that we can all agree on, is the government should protect our livelihood. And, of course, they do that with military and police. But then, of course, since the Great Depression, we've also tasked the government with trying to balance the economy to make sure that it's doing well, that no one group of people is suffering, and that the entire country as a whole is able to be successful and make progress. And so since the Great Depression, we really had to ask the government to try to look out for the economy, because one of the 3 rights in the Declaration of Independence is pursuit of happiness. And of course, you can't really pursue your happiness if you have to worry about finding something to eat every day. So what does the government do? The simplest definition is protect our rights, but it's more complicated than that. So people do expect it to provide goods and services, things like roads, for instance, to protect our lives and watch over the economy. And when we talk about government, the United States system is incredibly complicated. And one of the reasons is because we do have more than one type of government. There are different ways to organize. And we can either have a centralized or unitary system where all the power comes out of one place, or we can have a federal system where the power is shared. And which one of these two is used in the United States? Does anybody know? Yeah. Well, we're talking about technically, legally, how. Yes, so it's a federal system. So we have a federal system where the power is shared between the national, state, and local governments. So we have those 3 levels that share the power. And even when there is a president that wants a more centralized system, there's not a lot they can do. For instance, a lot of people were scared when Joe Biden got elected that he would use the power of the presidency to force everyone to wear masks, even at home, or some stuff like that. But really, the president doesn't have a lot of power over health matters. Most of that is left to the state governors. So there's not a lot the president can do. So even when people, for instance, blame President Trump for COVID and the things that happened, really, even he didn't have a lot of power to fix a lot of the things that were going on. I think presidential power is service and wartime. Right. Most of the powers of the president fall under his title as commander-in-chief. Another way to organize yourself is to have a loose alliance or confederation. That's what the Confederacy had during the Civil War. And that was actually our first form of government. Before we had the Constitution, we had a confederation. It was under a document known as the Articles of Confederation. And the problem is these systems are so loose that really there's not a lot of cooperation between them. And that's one of the many reasons why the traitors who called themselves the illegal confederacy were doomed to fail no matter what, because they didn't really even want to cooperate with each other that much. One of the few figures they had that was centralizing was Robert E. Lee, but he had a tough time getting troops from other parts of the country or cooperation from other states. So a loose alliance is often not a good idea. And then there's ways to rule. When we first set up our country, we had to look at all kinds of different governments that existed in the past and decide exactly what type of system that we wanted as well. And probably the most common system throughout history up until the Founding Fathers came along was an autocracy, where you had just one person in charge. Just one person in charge. And this one person in charge was often in the form of things like monarchy, a king or queen, a person that passed along their throne in most cases to the next generation. And this included the system that America came from, our mother country, Britain, which still, of course, has a monarchy today, but the monarch doesn't really have that much power anymore. But at the time, of course, the king did have a little bit more sway than today. But even though they weren't necessarily all powerful, the Founding Fathers did not want to create a new system that had that same type of autocracy. Yes? What's theocracy again? Theocracy is when there is a religious government. And of course, another common form of autocracy is dictator. And we see this in some modern countries today. It used to be a system that was used in ancient times as more of an emergency situation when power was handed over to one person. But even back then, it was easy for that one person to make excuses and hold on to power and become corrupt. And so the Founding Fathers wanted to avoid that as well. And then, of course, there's also an emperor, and this is really just a monarch that governs over many different kinds of people. When Britain ended up taking other places under its heel, such as India, for instance, they did also give the monarch that title of emperor or empress. But the Founding Fathers really weren't interested in this type of system. There's also an oligarchy. And oligarchy, when you see that prefix O-L-I, that means you're looking at a small group of people being in charge. And so this is a little bit different than autocracy, but often it ends up being about the same. Often kings or queens, when they were deposed or kicked off the throne, you would see a group of aristocrats take over instead. Yeah, well, no, not bourgeoisie. The aristocracy is actually nobility, so they would be cousins of the king or queen, sometimes distant cousins. And they, of course, were tired of just one particular family within the nobility ruling, so they would often revolt to try to get power for themselves. But in many cases, they really didn't end up ruling a lot differently than the monarchy itself. The Communist Party rule over China is also a form of oligarchy. Even though the Chinese Communist Party is huge and it has millions of people, it's really tiny compared to the total population of China. And really, the Communist Party doesn't even follow communism or use communism in any way. Really, all that their main purpose is just keep control of the country and all the power for themselves. And so it's easy for an oligarchy to be just as corrupt and tyrannical as a monarchy. And then, of course, there's in this situation where the military takes control and rules over a country. We've seen this happen in Egypt in quite a few times. Myanmar is another place where the military has allowed some democracy, but in the past has had a lot of control. And also Turkey. Before the current regime was in charge, the military would often swoop in to make decisions and take over the government. But even though George Washington was an incredibly popular general, the Founding Fathers, of course, did not want a large standing army to be in control of the country. And then, of course, the last way, and we'll go ahead and stop here, would be to use some type of democracy. And we use this term a little bit loosely today. Technically, if you go back to the original meaning, is what the people would be in charge. And technically, that isn't what the United States has. We have what is called a republic instead. But we've come up with two different terms to try to make that a little bit better. One would be direct democracy, where the people vote on the laws. So, for instance, you've seen a TV show, The Simpsons does this. They have a town hall meeting. Everybody gets together and votes on things. That would be an example of direct democracy. But in reality, most places, including the United States, use what we call representative democracy, where we choose people to make the laws for us. This is also technically called a republic, and that's actually what the United States is. It is a republic. People call us a democracy, and that's not quite correct unless they throw that word representative in there, because technically we're a republic. And you'll still hear politicians often in speeches refer to it as a republic. And we will take a little bit of notes every day like that, especially in the middle of the period, to try to break it up a little bit more. And when you're done, of course, at the end of the week, you'll submit it here with the notes. So you'll just each day for this week come back to that same file. The other two things you can take some time to go ahead and explore. The supplemental reading is a document that has different materials, and once again, I can't look at it because I'm a teacher, not a student, but it has different subjects in it from the Founding Fathers' perspective, what they are inspired to see. Here's what the supplemental reading looks like, and it talks about each of the three governments that would inspire the Founding Fathers, ancient Greece, and it talks about Rome, and it also talks about the British system as well. Now, you don't have to complete all of this. You just need to complete one of the sections, so you can choose any one of them. So if you want to read more about ancient Greece or Rome or Britain, you just need to review one of those. So let me make sure I put that in the directions. So you just need to choose one of those sections. And when you do that, you just need to highlight one thing per paragraph or section that you think is important on the right-hand side. And on each page, type 2 to 3 comments or questions that you, for instance, you might have questions for the instructor. That's the supplemental reading. The textbook reading, once again, we're not going to read that entire book. But in there, you'll see the instructions for that, and it has a specific document that goes with it. So there you can see the textbook reading, and it's set up in a similar format. You put questions and comments on this side. And with each of these little points you come to, you'll see there are specific places that you would read from. So this says only the first 3 paragraphs from chapter 1. So you just type 3 major points from these 3 paragraphs. Then it will give you this section here, titles What is Government, on pages 4 to 5. So it shows you each of the page numbers, and it tells you something specific to look at. It either gives you a title, or it says the pictures on page 7, for instance. And that is what you'll get from the textbook. So you won't read the entire chapter 1. You'll only look at the sections that it tells you to read. Once you get everything done for Module 1, you can see there's also 2 quizzes. Each of these quizzes you can take twice. You can take them twice. They do have more than 10 questions. You'll get 10 questions. Canvas will randomly pull 10, so you won't necessarily get the same 10 the second time. But you do have 2 opportunities, and Canvas will sync with PowerSchool. It will only give the highest score. So even if you score lower the second time, it'll give you the higher one. So after you're done with all this, or you can take it the first time before you do everything and see what you need to learn more about, or you can take it both times after you're done with everything. That's entirely up to you, just as long as all of it is done by the 29th.